Elder Scrolls III Morrowind is a role-playing game developed by Bethesda Softworks and released in 2002. It's my personal favorite game of all time, and what I believe is one of the most important RPG games to come out in the 2000s. Morrowind streamlined a lot of mechanics that were deemed as too complicated to the average gamer, and introduced an expansive world and dynamic story to all types of gamers, no matter how hardcore or casual. To me, the biggest success of Morrowind is how it brought something as complex as the Western RPG to the general market. Look at games like Wizardry 8, another excellent game that came out 1 year before Morrowind. Both games are equal in complexity, but Morrowind's presentation and streamlined appearance is what made it much more accessible and much more popular. In this video, I want to talk about how Morrowind succeeds in showing rather than telling, and how the plot throughout the game slowly unravels through immersive storytelling. Although the main content out of Morrowind comes from the side quests and your own progression as a character, there is a central plot that revolves around godlike beings called the Tribunal, who rule over Morrowind, and how a once allied deity, Dagoth and his sixth house, have created a plague called Corpus at the center of Morrowind in Red Mountain. The player begins as a criminal who is released to Morrowind by its emperor, Uriel Septim. They are asked to deliver a package to Caius Casodes, an agent of the emperor. However, this is entirely up to the player, as after being released they can now do as they wish. If you decide to deliver the package to Caius, you will help him investigate the Sixth House, and the Ashlander prophecies of the Nerevarine. As you investigate, you learn piece by piece about the Nerevarine prophecies, and the part it plays in the culture of the people of Morrowind, called the Ashlanders. You will visit locations of religious importance, meet with spies, ex-Sixth House members, and read books about Morrowind's history in the game to understand story. Morrowind employs the use of environmental storytelling instead of cutscenes to immerse the player, as the world in its own is the plot and the most important aspect of the game. Books in Morrowind play an important role in the player learning the entirety of the story. Morrowind has over 300 books, and if you were able to compile all the pages together, you would have over 1,000 pages. These books provide long serial stories and provide hints to the player into the background history of the game. The story of Morrowind is subtle and dense and allows the players to take it all at their own pace. Instead of passively developing its plot, Morrowind is much more focused on active and dynamic storytelling elements. Active events, such as joining certain factions, causes the opposite faction to dislike you, and killing certain essential NPCs, or would sculpt Morrowind's experience. My favorite example has to be when becoming the House Sylvani Hortator. You can either persuade the council members by doing mini-quests for all of them, or kill them, as it is their custom for resolving disputes. Of course, the latter is the much harder path, as they are high-level wizards and cast high-level spells, but the option is still there, and the lore behind that decision perfectly lines up. The dynamic elements come from the general exploration and the NPCs you find while exploring. The best example has to be Rolly the Talking Guar, and Hentis who lost his pants while bathing in the river. The player is not expected to interact with every NPC and see every quest, but the ones they do come across is what will shape their experience. Lastly, in this section, I want to talk about Morrowind's environmental storytelling, and the best way to go about this is simply just to show you. Early in the main quest, when Sharon Gro Musgrub sends you to Andreo's ancestral tomb, she tells you to use enchanted weapons, because normal ones won't quite work on the spirits. So you go to the tomb, and right inside you see a dead body with a ghost hovering above it. You loot the body, and you see he only had normal weapons, no enchanted ones. I find this quite amusing, and also very helpful. It's interesting to think about how the game teaches you through its environment, not just any sort of text prompt that tells you, hey, you can't use these weapons on these enemies. As you progress through the Fighters Guild, you will eventually get a quest that sends you to Telestro, a Sixth House base, to help out Sandale. When you make it to the base, you see a note from Sandale. She says it looked safe, so you go inside. When you get inside, you see it's full of Corpus zombies, and as you fight your way through, you think, how did Sandale make it through? Is she alive? All these enemies are sponges. They take 1,000,000 shots to kill. Once you reach the basement, you open the door, and you bear witness to her, perfectly alive and healthy, standing on a fucking table in order to stay out of reach of a couple rats. One last quick example I'd like to point out is how impressive it is that every NPC in the game has a specific name, personal equipment, and their own class and background. This added detail is something that your average player can easily gloss over, but it gives the game depth and character. It makes the game feel more alive. It makes Morrowind feel like a real place, somewhere you could actually go, maybe even have a little vacation under Red Mountain. Coda. Coda is the concept that the only canon that is canon is determined by the player's own gameplay. Basically, Bethesda provides the tools to create the story, and the player creates their own campaign. Morrowind was heavily inspired by pen and paper RPGs such as D&D, and the idea of Coda aligned with those old school games. The players build their own lore atop of the already established lore. Thus, The Elder Scrolls is merely only a framework, and each player has their own way to develop their own Coda and create their own stories. Every story is going to be different than another, and no one playthrough can be the same. Morrowind, like other games in the Elder Scrolls series, follow a free-form world, a world with few boundaries that constrict the player's actions. From the very start of the game, the player is put in this world where they're allowed to explore, steal, quest, kill, interact with NPCs without necessarily following the main quest. Lead designer Kent Rolston, when asked before the release of Morrowind on what he thought the core, untouchable design elements of the game was, he responded with, the free-formed experience. Every Elder Scrolls game lets you create the kind of character you want, and the kind of things you want to do. We would never have an Elder Scrolls role-playing game that forces you to be a certain character and go down a certain path. In order to help the player create their own experience, Morrowind offers the player detailed guilds, religious organizations, political houses, and side quests that are only found throughout the player's own exploration, as well as a deep, interconnected main quest. The main quest itself allows the player to tackle it in their own way, and allows for multiple interpretations depending on the type of story you want to create for yourself. There are many high-level tasks that must be completed in order, but as you progress, subtasks are introduced to the player, and they are allowed to complete them in any order that they see fit. All the choices that the player makes define their character, and on each playthrough, the player can create their own narrative and establish a new identity for themselves. On one playthrough, I could be Jack, the heroic Dunmer spellsword, who explores tombs and is trying to find meaning in the Nerevarine prophecy. On another playthrough, I could be Jaja, an escaped Argonian slave who cares nothing about the Nerevarine prophecy and honestly is a little too dumb to even understand what it means. He's maddened and worships Sheogorath. He then sets off to House Tovlani to become a grand wizard and have his own slaves take care of him. In Morrowind, the game designers organized the story's content into the interactivity of the game. Thus, the unfolding events of the game's story is triggered naturally by the player's own actions and progression. Marcelo calls this temporality, a simultaneous narration. He describes it as, the temporality in in-game narration translates into real-time unfolding events. The story is told the very moment that it occurs. It is fundamental for the player's interactivity and agency within the game world. Because of the fact that the developers want to push such a focus on the player creating their own experience, Morrowind comes with its own software called the Morrowind Construction Set. This allows players to create their own content using the same resources that the devs used to create Morrowind. Keep in mind that Morrowind came out in 2002 and is 18 years old, yet there are still huge modding projects created by the community, like Tamriel Rebuilt, that plans on adding the main content of Morrowind as well as the rest of Tamriel eventually. Also, let's not forget about the legendary Gopnik mod for Morrowind that turns Morrowind into Russia. These elements are unique to Morrowind and the Elder Scrolls games as a whole. Many games have mods, but not to the degree and complexity as mods found in the Elder Scrolls games. This all comes back to Coda, as these mods are all canon and exist in the player's own little world. Allowing for modding to be a core game mechanic and not just something extra brings a lot of depth to Morrowind and adds something that's not seen in a lot of other games. Morrowind, with its immersive environmental storytelling and its focus on free-formed game design, are what to me make it a perfect game. And that's not even getting into its beautiful alien-like environment. I understand that this game might not be for everybody, as the combat is incredibly dated as it relies on a dice rolling system, but to me it's all worth it in the end. Its ability to create a story that is personal to each playthrough keeps me coming back to Morrowind. Playthrough after playthrough, sometimes I feel like I've done it all, seen it all, done every quest imaginable, traveled to every location, collected every single item, but in each playthrough, I seem to find something worth my time. And each time I feel like I'm closer to understanding the world that is Morrowind.